What happens when a Hollywood legend, a cinematic giant with a career spanning over 50 years, steps into the high-stakes arena of late-night television, expecting a respectful chat about his latest film, only to discover he's been lured into a calculated ambush designed to tear him down in front of a national audience? Tonight, we're diving into a confrontation so raw and explosive it left viewers stunned, the studio in chaos, and one iconic actor walking off the set in righteous indignation. Hit that subscribe button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and brace yourself. This story will upend everything you thought you knew about the polished world of late-night TV. The Late Show studio crackled with anticipation as Clint Eastwood, at 94, made his way to the guest chair. The legendary actor and director, whose name is synonymous with gritty westerns, heart-wrenching dramas, and Oscar-winning masterpieces, moved with the same quiet authority that had defined his decades-long career. The audience erupted in thunderous applause, their admiration for the icon filling the room with genuine warmth, a reaction so powerful it seemed to catch even the seasoned production crew off guard. Stephen Colbert strode out from behind his sleek desk, arms flung wide, his grin wide and theatrical. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Clint Eastwood." He boomed, his voice dripping with late-night showmanship, but a sharp glint in his eyes hinted at something more calculated, less welcoming. Eastwood settled into his seat, adjusting his tailored jacket with the precision of a man who'd spent a lifetime perfecting every detail. His weathered face, etched with the lines of experience, carried the steely intensity of his iconic roles in films like Dirty Harry and $1 Million Baby*. Colbert took his place behind the desk, shuffling a stack of note cards with exaggerated care, his gaze deliberately avoiding Eastwood's piercing blue eyes. The studio lights burned brighter than usual, casting stark shadows that sharpened the air's growing tension. "Clint, it's an absolute privilege to have you here," Colbert began, his smile broad but somehow hollow, like a mask slipping at the edges. At 94, most people would be kicking back, maybe hitting the golf course or relaxing by the ocean, but you're still out there directing films, breaking boundaries. Some might call that stubbornness. What keeps you going? Eastwood's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle signal to those familiar with his work that he wasn't here for games. "Stephen, when you've got a story worth telling, you don't stop just because the years add up," he said, his voice low, measured, and heavy with conviction. "I've always stood by what I believe in. Age doesn't change that." The audience nodded, some clapping softly, their respect for his grit evident. Colbert leaned forward, hands gesturing with animated flair, as if trying to keep the mood light. "Absolutely, Clint, that passion's what makes you a legend. And speaking of passion, I bet our audience is dying to hear about some of your, let's say, bolder political stances over the years. You've never been one to hold back, have you?" The question landed like a loaded weapon, the studio's warmth fading into a taut silence. Eastwood's posture remained steady, but a faint tension crept into his shoulders, a sign he sensed the trap being set. "I believe in speaking my truth," he replied, his tone deliberate, each word chosen with care. "Sometimes that means saying things that ruffle feathers. Honesty isn't always popular, but it's what I stand by." Colbert's grin sharpened, his eyes glinting with a predatory edge. Like that moment at the Republican National Convention, when you had that memorable chat with an empty chair. That was honest, in its own way. "Care to walk us through what you were thinking?" The room went still, the hum of cameras barely audible over the audience's uneasy shifting. The earlier warmth was gone, replaced by a palpable tension that pressed against the studio walls. Eastwood's jaw tightened slightly, a telltale sign of his growing wariness. "That was a moment of improvisation, Stephen," he said, his voice steady but laced with a sharp edge. "Sometimes the best way to make a point is to ditch the script and let the moment speak for itself." Colbert leaned back, drawing out the word with theatrical relish. Improvisation. Some might say it looked like an older guy arguing with furniture. "Not sure everyone caught your point there, Clint." The insult hit like a slap, sharp and deliberate. A few audience members gasped, others squirmed in their seats, as cameras zoomed in on Eastwood's face, capturing every flicker of emotion. "You're twisting what happened," he said, his voice controlled but carrying a distinct bite. "But I suppose that's what passes for talk shows these days, spinning narratives to fit an agenda." Colbert's smile widened, his teeth gleaming under the harsh lights. "Oh, Clint, I'm no journalist, I'm a comedian. And from a comedy perspective, that chair bit was pure gold. Unintentional, Maybe, but gold. Eastwood's piercing gaze locked onto Colbert, unflinching and intense. Is this a comedy show, Stephen? Because I was told I was here for a serious conversation about my new film. His words carried the weight of a man who'd commanded respect on film sets for decades. The audience tensed, sensing the conversation veering into dangerous territory. It is about your work, Colbert replied, flipping through his note cards with exaggerated precision. Your work, your legacy, your impact on American culture. And let's be real, that chair moment is part of that legacy now, whether you like it or not. Eastwood sat taller, his hands steady on the armrests, tension radiating from his frame. You invited me here under false pretenses, didn't you, Stephen? He asked, his voice low and cutting, slicing through the studio's artificial warmth. Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise, his hands gesturing dramatically. False pretenses, Clint. I invited the Clint Eastwood, filmmaker, icon, and occasional political firebrand, to discuss his incredible career. Isn't that exactly what we're doing here? Eastwood's eyes didn't waver, his gaze like a laser boring into his host. What we're doing is you trying to humiliate me for your audience's amusement, he said, his tone growing colder with each word. The question is why. Colbert set his cards down, clasping his hands in a gesture that might have seemed sincere if not for the calculated glint in his eyes. Clint, you're being a bit oversensitive. This is late-night TV, we poke fun at public figures. It's what we do. Surely a man with your tough reputation can handle a little ribbing. Ribbing is one thing, Eastwood replied, his words slow and deliberate, each one landing like a hammer. Disrespect dressed up as humor is something else entirely. You're not asking questions, you're setting a trap. The studio's air grew heavy, the tension thick enough to choke on. Colbert's laugh was sharp, almost brittle, cutting through the silence like broken glass. A trap, Clint. This is late-night television at its finest, just a lively conversation between two people. No, Eastwood said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had silenced film sets for decades. This is you using your platform to score cheap political points at the expense of a guest who came here in good faith. The audience grew restless, their earlier excitement replaced by discomfort. The crew, stationed behind the cameras, exchanged nervous glances, sensing the interview spiraling into uncharted territory. Colbert's polished demeanor began to crack, his smile taking on a sharper, almost sinister edge. Good faith, he scoffed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Let's talk about good faith, Clint. Was it good faith when you endorsed politicians who pushed policies that divided this country? Was it good faith when you lent your name to causes that restricted voting rights in marginalized communities? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've used your fame to amplify some pretty harmful agendas. Eastwood's eyes flashed with a controlled fury, the kind that could make even the toughest adversaries pause. You're throwing around accusations without understanding the complexity of the issues or the people involved, he said, his voice steady but laced with an unmistakable edge. You're parroting talking points, not seeking the truth. Colbert leaned forward, his voice rising with intensity. I understand plenty, Clint. I understand that your influence has helped normalize extreme viewpoints that have torn families apart and damaged our democracy. The audience murmured, their discomfort growing audible. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of what was no longer an interview but a verbal battlefield. Eastwood's voice remained calm, but a fire burned beneath it. You invited me here to promote my new film, he said, and instead, you're turning this into a political inquisition. You're doing exactly what you accuse me of, pushing your own agenda while pretending it's something noble. Colbert's laugh was cold, bitter, and devoid of humor. My agenda is holding powerful people accountable, Clint. It's making sure celebrities like you don't get a free pass just because you've made some iconic movies. Eastwood's gaze hardened, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And who appointed you the arbiter of accountability? When did late-night TV become a courtroom where you get to prosecute your guests for their beliefs? Colbert stood, pacing slightly behind his desk, his agitation spilling over into his movements. The moment those beliefs started hurting real people, Clint, he snapped. The moment your endorsements fueled division and polarization that's ripping this country apart. Eastwood's voice rose for the first time, a hint of raw anger breaking through his legendary composure. You're lecturing me about polarization. Take a look at what you're doing right now, Stephen. You're not bridging divides, you're creating them. You're not fostering understanding, you're manufacturing conflict for ratings. Colbert stopped pacing, turning to face Eastwood directly, his expression now openly hostile. Sometimes conflict is necessary, he said, his voice tight with conviction. Sometimes people need to be confronted with the consequences of their actions, their words, their endorsements. Eastwood leaned forward, his presence filling the studio like a gathering storm. Is that what this is? A public confrontation designed to shame me? If that's your plan, Stephen, you should have been upfront about it from the start. Colbert returned to his seat, his posture aggressive, his eyes burning with barely contained contempt. I think our viewers deserve to see the real Clint Eastwood, he said, not the carefully curated Hollywood myth. They deserve to see how you react when your record is challenged. Eastwood's voice grew harder, each word a deliberate strike. My record, 50 years in this industry, films that have entertained and inspired millions around the globe. What's your record, Stephen? What have you built besides a platform for tearing others down? The jab hit its mark. Colbert's face flushed, his carefully constructed TV persona crumbling under the weight of Eastwood's words. What I've built is a show that gives a voice to people who don't have your fame, he shot back, his voice trembling with anger. What I've built is a platform that holds powerful people accountable. You've built a bully pulpit, Eastwood countered, his words slicing through the studio air. You've built a career on attacking people who can't fight back in your medium. That's not accountability, that's cowardice. The audience was now visibly restless, some casting glances toward the exits, others whispering among themselves. The production crew looked increasingly uneasy, their hands hovering over controls as if debating whether to intervene. The interview had crossed a line, venturing far beyond the playful banter of late-night TV into something raw, personal, and deeply uncomfortable. Colbert's voice, when he spoke again, was tight with barely controlled rage. Cowardice. You want to talk about cowardice, Clint? How about hiding behind your tough guy movie roles while supporting politicians who attack immigrants, minorities, and working families? How about using your influence to prop up systems that hurt the vulnerable while you live in your Hollywood ivory tower? Eastwood's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than a shout. You don't know a damn thing about my life or my values, Stephen. You don't know what I've done for my community, what I've contributed, or what I truly stand for. All you know is the caricature you've built to fit your narrative. I know enough, Colbert replied, his professional mask now completely gone, his voice shaking with raw emotion. I know you've spent years lending your credibility to causes that have made life harder for millions of Americans. I know you've used your celebrity to normalize extreme political positions. Eastwood stood slowly, his full height and presence dominating the studio. The movement was deliberate, controlled, but carried an unmistakable air of defiance. I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, Stephen, he said. I've faced tougher opponents than you, men who tried to use me for their own ends. But I've never met someone so eager to betray basic human decency for a few laughs and political points. Colbert stood too, refusing to be physically overshadowed, though his smaller frame made the gesture seem defensive rather than assertive. Decency, he scoffed. That's rich coming from someone who's backed politicians who've attacked the marginalized. Eastwood took a step closer to the desk, his voice steady but laced with cold fury. You keep making these accusations without a single specific example. That's because this isn't about facts, it's about you needing to feel morally superior to your guests. The studio was a pressure cooker, the air crackling with hostility. The audience sat in stunned silence, their earlier excitement replaced by a mix of shock and discomfort. Eastwood's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You're not changing anything, Stephen. You're just adding to the noise, creating division for entertainment while accusing me of the same. Colbert slammed his hand on the desk, the sound reverberating through the silent studio. Don't lecture me about division. You've spent decades supporting politicians who've attacked the very fabric of our democracy. And there it is, Eastwood said, a bitter smile crossing his weathered face. The real reason you invited me here. This was never about my film, it was about you using your show as a weapon to settle a political score. Colbert's voice rose to a near shout, his composure shattered. Your views aren't just wrong, Clint, they're dangerous. Your endorsements have real-world consequences, and I won't let you hide behind your fame. Eastwood's laugh was sharp, devoid of warmth. I make movies, Stephen. The fact that you think my opinions carry such enormous weight says more about your obsession with celebrity culture than it does about me." Colbert's response was immediate, venomous. "I'm done with softball interviews for people like you. It's time someone held you accountable." "Accountable to you?" Eastwood towered over the desk, his presence overwhelming. "A talk show host who thinks throwing tantrums on TV makes him a moral authority. Look at your audience, Stephen. Do they look entertained, or do they look like they're watching something ugly and unnecessary?" For the first time, Colbert glanced at the crowd. Their faces were a mix of shock, embarrassment, and unease, no trace of the excitement they'd shown at the start. "What they're seeing," Eastwood continued, his voice low but commanding, "is a bully using his platform to attack a guest who came here in good faith. What they're seeing is cracking with emotion." "You lied about this interview's purpose," Eastwood replied, his tone icy. "You turned what should have been a conversation into a public execution." Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but Eastwood raised a hand, silencing him with the authority of a man who'd commanded respect for decades. "I've heard enough," he said, his voice carrying a finality that brooked no argument. "I came here to talk about my work, my craft, my art. Instead, I've been subjected to a political hit job disguised as an interview." He began removing his microphone, his movements slow and deliberate, each gesture a rebuke of the chaos around him. "I've dealt with better men than you, Stephen, men who tried to use me for their own agendas. But I've never met someone so willing to sacrifice their own credibility for cheap political theater. You can't just walk out." Colbert's voice cracked with desperation, a hint of panic creeping in. "We're not finished here." Eastwood fixed him with a look of pure contempt, his blue eyes cutting through the studio's haze. "We're finished, Stephen. We were finished the moment you chose ambush over honesty." He handed his microphone to a stunned production assistant, then turned to the audience, addressing them directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to witness this. You came here for a conversation, and you deserved better than watching a host attack his guest for sport." With that, Clint Eastwood turned and strode toward the studio exit, his footsteps echoing in the deafening silence. The audience sat frozen, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Colbert stood behind his desk, mouth agape, his polished TV persona shattered as he grappled with the reality of what had just unfolded. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the chaos as Eastwood reached the door, paused for a fleeting moment, and walked out without a backward glance. The sound of the door slamming shut reverberated through the studio, snapping the audience out of their trance. The silence lingered, heavy and oppressive, as Colbert stood alone, his face a storm of shock, anger, and dawning realization. The interview, meant to promote Eastwood's latest film, had instead become a raw, unfiltered exposé of everything broken in modern media. In his quest to score political points, Colbert had lost his guest, and revealed something ugly about himself in the process. The audience, once buzzing with excitement, now sat in stunned silence, some looking to the exits, others whispering among themselves, trying to process the verbal carnage they'd just witnessed. "So, what do you think? Was Stephen Colbert justified in his confrontational approach, or did he cross the line from tough questions into personal vendetta? Was this a bold stand for accountability, or a calculated ambush that backfired spectacularly?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that rip the veil off the polished world of celebrity culture. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a moment that exposed the raw, unscripted truth about the games played when the cameras roll.